Well, even though I started it, speaking of don't laying in fuel, I got a call from the FAA one day, and wasn't that long ago, and he said, "Hey, Kevin, what are you teaching your students about aviation approved tools?" As far as I know, there's no aviation approved tools. It's just tools. And he said, "Well, what are you teaching them about electric drill guns and such?" And I'm like, "Well, I pretty much teach them don't. I don't say it. I'm just silent on it. You know, when I work on my own airplane, I rarely use a screw gun because it strips screws. But when you're doing production setting, everybody uses it. You just got to be careful, which they're not. Anyway, yeah, he was telling me that, you know, well, there was a person somewhere nearby in this district who was working on his airplane. He's a CFI. Maybe you guys know what I'm talking about. He's a CFI, not a mechanic per se, but was doing an owner-assisted annual on an airplane, and he was told to pull all the panels out. So he's using his electric gun, pulling the panels. He gets to one, he starts pulling the screws out, and fuel starts coming out. He's like, "Oh crap, that's a panel to the wing tank. It's a wet wing, so you know I need to screw it back in." Spark, explosion, and yeah, killed him and blew the hangar up. This is a couple years ago, and so the guy who called me, he started looking into it, and he said the number of fatalities annually from working on aircraft was shocking to him. How many people die every year from that very mistake?
Yeah, because inside the little motor rotates and the little
sparks. Yeah. So.
All the jets, that's all they use. The full panels.
Electric screw guns?
Screw.
Well, thankfully you're running kerosene now, Jet A.
Yeah.
This is 100 low lead.
Even when I was working on little guys, they would electric because at that point it's efficiency.
It is.
So they're trying to get them turn faster.
In and out. Strip the screws.
Yeah,
do it later.
By that point, you know what you're doing, but for like a CFI, yeah.
Can they run without a spark?
I don't know. There was one, he brought up to my attention, there was one Snap-on Aviation screw gun. It was something like $12,000. It was some absurd number.
Not bad for Snap-on.
So, welcome to Tool Talk. All right. Let's get back to it. Well, I kind of stopped right in the middle of something here. So we were talking about this, well, not really. We're still in the subheading here. Let me see, at idle. So we're talking about the Bendix fuel injection system. At idle, the main jet is reduced in size. The main jet is reduced in size. And of course, you reduce the main jet in size. That means you're going to restrict fuel going into the metered fuel, which is going to cause a differential between what we're calling D and C, which is going to cause the poppet to want to close. And that was represented with, let me see, one of these pictures. That one right there. So at idle, this right here is going to close that right there. So we have just a little tiny jet, and then it's going to slide out of the way, and there you have the bigger jet that was covered up just a second ago. It's a terrible picture. It should look like the actual one. And then once we get to takeoff position, we have two parallel jets, and I think we talked about that. All right, so let me see. Oh, I didn't write about it though, did I?
That picture is of the main metering jet.
Yes. So G, the enrichment system. And why do we have an enrichment system? Same answer since carburetors.
Give power at idle and, or more fuel at idle and full throttle.
Right, but the enrichment is more towards the high power for fear of detonation. All right, some engines use an enrichment. Some engines, I should say carburetors, but use an enrichment jet parallel to the main jet So as the throttle is open, I'll just put at high power settings. At high power settings. Here we go. And of course, we still have our manual mixture control. Manual mixture control. And it's got the same purpose. How do we know if the manual mixture control is set correctly?
When you pull it back, there'll be a rise, slight rise.
Let's not use it. How do we know when the manual mixture control is set correctly? I'm sorry, not the, I was thinking the idle mixture control. Boy, I just blew that one. Manual mixture control, whole nother thing. Yep, screwed that one up. Manual mixture control, which knob is that? We'll set that part out too. The red one, okay. Where is the red knob typically at takeoff?
To the,
All the way in.
All the way in. When would it not be all the way in? For takeoff. High altitude takeoffs. So you'd be running way too rich. You're so rich that you're gonna be losing a bunch of power. So you got to pull it out some for high altitude takeoffs. It's 105. Oh, it's really hot. Yes. Yep. And you just had ice cream with your buddies and okay. So I got it up. Wish I could found a way to say it, way too much of it. So what does that do? It effectively reduces the size of the main metering jet. Size of the main metering jet. Which causes less fuel to flow into D, which also causes a greater differential between D and C, which causes fuel metering force to go, I know, down or up. Well, air metering force went up, so this has to kind of compensate. So it causes a greater differential, so in a weird way, it like causes air metering force to go up. Shouldn't say, or fuel metering, so we shouldn't say that. We'll just say a greater differential, so we don't confuse people. So a greater differential between the two chambers, which tends to do what to the poppet? Close.
Differential which pressures?
Between the two fuel chambers. So
Unmetered and metered.
unmetered, so it's a greater differential, which tends to close the poppet. Now, if that's confusing for you, think of it this way.
I'm just trying to remember which way the needles actually move.
Oh,
D minus C.
let's go back to, I like that one. So, oh, wait a minute, because that one actually has it. So, there, we're just going to close the mixture control, which effectively reduces the size of the main metering jet, which causes a greater differential between these two, which tends to close the poppet. But if that confuses you, just think, well, if we close that main metering jet off a little bit, then less fuel flows this way. And if that works for you, it works.
Can you write close metering jet?
Effectively reduces the size of the main metering jet. That's what I
Okay.
put there. So, and that is connected to red knob. Connected to red knob in the cockpit. Let's see, AMC. It's an option. You don't have to have it. I've got two types here. I've got the bellows type. Let's see, bellows type. Find it here. Oh, it's the color picture. There we go. AMC right there. So it's an option, so they put it off to the side. But it is very, very similar to the PS5 carburetor. If you're thinking, I don't know that one, then now you will. So we're just going to break off a piece of this line right here, the blue, which is Venturi suction. And we're going to break off a line over here for impact air. So when we are at low altitude? It is?
Contracted.
Yes. It is contracted. It is much smaller, and it's small. So it's an inverted needle, so it's going to pull that needle up, 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 closing this off right there. So when it's contracted, no air is being leaked between the two chambers. So we go up in altitude, and it's going to expand, which then that drops this needle down, which makes it go into the very small part of the needle, which creates a bypass right there. So we are going to have the, let's say, impact air bleeds off into the venturi suction, which causes the air metering force to go down, which causes the poppet to want to close, which causes less fuel to flow to the flow divider. I don't know why I lined this out, because it actually works. So bellows type. So uses a bellows that is filled with helium. That is filled with helium. Works independently of and in parallel with the manual mixture control. So works by itself, and you still have manual mixture control. So works independently. Independently of and in parallel with manual mixture control. Let me see. Uses an inverted needle. At low altitude. Bellows is compressed. Sealing off passage between impact and venturi. At high altitude or hot days, or hot, bellows expands. Opening orifice. Bleeding off. Impact into venturi, lowering the air metering force, which leans out the carburetor. There is also, you want me to go back? Tell me when I'm ready, when I'm good. Yeah? Okay. There's also the bullet type. Now the bullet type is located inside of the throttle body. The housing actually forms the venturi because it forms a restriction. So the housing forms venturi, works the same as the other bellows type, but it's exposed to the venturi because here it is, rather than impact air. But there's the bullet type. So. Yeah, I don't like that. The words that I just used.
Does it affect the suction?
Well, that's why I said I've read it, and I'm like, oh, come on, let's think this through. The bellows is exposed to what?
Ambient.
Yeah, I think it's always got to be exposed to ambient air, not vacuum, unless it's calibrated to be off vacuum. But then that's going to be subject to the airflow going through it. So as you open the throttle and you have more air through, you can have more vacuum, which is going to affect this. Well, now it's tied into throttle position rather than altitude, so it can't do that. So this has to be vented, I think, from behind the venturi, which it created, which is probably what these are right here, going to ambient. Wait a minute. So the bullet itself, it's got to be, it can't be direct vacuum, but here's one source, which is probably impact or vacuum.
Are they assuming?
I'm gonna go vacuum. This lower chamber is vacuum.
So we're talking back. So
It is. Well, that's the way the drawing shows it. And then there's a bleed path that actually goes always open, which is interesting. And then it's going to come through the needle here. Doesn't show it real well, but up through here and out that way. Interesting. It's got another passage there. That's the bullet type. I haven't seen this type in the field, but I see it being exposed to vacuum. So I guess that statement holds true. All right, I'm just going to say number 2 is the bullet type. And that is located in the throttle body. Throttle body and forms the venturi. Otherwise, it works pretty much the same. All right, so one more time. We've got our control unit. Start at the beginning. Here we go. Fuel comes in through the fuel inlet.
Yep.
Through the screen, which we check the hard way. Down into here, the first thing it's going to see is the manual mixture control valve. If the manual mixture control valve is full rich, then it's not. It is not metering any fuel. Fuel's going to come up through here, go into the main metering jet. Meanwhile, this fuel here, the unmetered fuel, is going to go around to its proper chamber. Through the metering jet, if it's wide open, if it's not wide open, then technically your throttle valve is going to do some of the metering. Like I said, some of these do have a secondary parallel. This one's not showing it. Another parallel jet for wide open throttle. This one's just showing one at the main metering jet. I've never figured out why they put a big plenum chamber here like that. Why this big chamber? It's an O-ring right there, and that's an O-ring right there, but that's what it looks like inside of them. All right, so that's going to go around and go to our metered fuel pressure. And of course, we know we've got venturi air and impact air is our air metering force. We have 2 springs in there that we know of. We have the constant head idle spring, which keeps the servo ball open during idle. And then during idle, what does the fuel metering?
It allows it to transition.
Oh, I'm sorry, the other jet's right. Oh no, that's this right here. This right here. Throttle valve. Throttle valve. Okay. We have the other spring, which is called the constant effort spring, which helps transition. Very good. All right. Fuel leaves the servo ball valve and heads off to the flow divider, which is where we're at now. So flow divider. Well, it receives fuel from the servo. It's pretty much got one moving part, but it consists of the valve. So you have a valve that slides up and down inside there. The sleeve, which it rides in. We have a diaphragm on top that uses the fuel pressure to open the valve. And a spring, which pushes down on the diaphragm to keep it closed until the fuel pressure is enough to pop it open. Now this has three purposes. One, ensure equal distribution of fuel to all nozzles. So ensure equal distribution of fuel to all nozzles. And it doesn't do anything special to ensure equal distribution. It's just built in such a way that all the passages are the same size. And it's not like it's got number one cylinder or number two. It's like it can go any which way if you wanted to. We just take the one it points to, but you didn't have to. Two, provide clean engine shutdown. That's kind of what that's what that spring on the top does. So when the fuel pressure starts to drop off below idle, then that's what's pushing on this diaphragm, holding the valve up. But the spring on top is going to slam it back down as soon as you lose pressure. So if it drops below idle pressure, the spring shoves it right down, instant fuel cutoff.
So does that mean no fuel will come out of the nozzles when the throttle is all the way open and the fuel mixture is open with the engine off?
It will, because that's going to provide fuel. So think about the engine when it's running, okay? And if I lose the engine-driven fuel pump, which is a diaphragm, but that's what you're talking about. The diaphragm pump is off, and I'm in flight, and the diaphragm pump fails, and I turn on the boost pump, the system works fine.
If the boost pump's off, there'll be no pressure, so no fuel leak.
So if the boost pump is off,
It's the engine's off.
if both are off, then no fuel will flow.
Even if it's full rich and full throttle.
Yeah, there's nothing.
There's no pressure.
supply.
No pressure.
Right.
Yeah. I was trying to think about a high wing with some head pressure. If that,
Is that
see, but the head pressure of a high wing is not enough to pop open those poppet valves. You have to have your boost pump on. So you turn on your boost pump, and it's going to run. If the servo is in idle cutoff, nothing happens.
Okay.
And you can see that on your flow gauge. With the throttle all the way forward, what's holding the poppet valve off its seat?
Just a spring.
Just a spring. And that spring's going to be in the same place if I'm full throttle or partial. It's just kind of idle, right? Because there's really no direct connection. So it's got to have, but as soon as I bring the mixture in, then it's going to open up that slider. It's going to open this up. And so once the boost pump is on, fuel is going to come through here, stop right here, and, well, I should say stop right here, and wait until this manual mixture control is open. Once it's open, fuel's coming through here. There's nothing to stop it. Idle, this is going to be open. Nothing to stop it, nothing to stop it. It's coming here, nothing to stop it. Still, nothing to stop it. And it's going to run up through. If the boost pump's on, that's enough pressure to push up on the diaphragm. It's going to open these up and fuel starts to flow.
Would you have to run it full rich for that to occur if your engine or pump?
No, as long as it's anywhere off idle cutoff, you're going to get fuel. Engine running or not. That's how we start these.
Yeah.
So to start a fuel-injected engine, they don't have primers. Rarely. Like I said, I've only seen one airplane, it's the Skymaster, that has a primer and a fuel system like this. But all the fuel injection systems I've ever worked on besides that particular one, this is the primer. So to start the engine, to prime it, you just bring the mixture up, turn on the electric boost pump, watch this gauge right here.
For a second.
It's on 0 and it starts to come up, and I wait till it comes up, I don't know, about here. Not more than 5 seconds maybe. 2 or 3 is about all I ever give it. I just watch it come up and then I shut it down.
That's where the other mechanic left it on too long.
Yeah. Now that's just me. There's a lot of different ways to do this. There's so many. I talk to so many people that have different ways. It works for me. Then but I'm terrified of hydraulic lock. Just terrified of it. So I don't give it a whole lot of fuel,
That's better.
and then I'll start cranking. And if you just kind of have to guess. If it's not starting, am I too rich or too lean? You just got to guess. If you think that you're too rich, you're going to take the throttle and go wide open to get more air. If you think you're too lean, hit the boost pump while you're cranking. And it'll put more fuel in.
Cool.
But you can't hydraulic lock if you're cranking and hit the boost pump at the same time, because it just can't put enough. That's what it's designed to do. All right, so provide clean engine shutdown. And this is going to be the big difference between Continental and the Bendix for this component. It regulates fuel at lower speeds. Continental goes through, I'll say, great lengths to make sure their system never regulates fuel at slow speeds. They use a double poppet valve. The diaphragm's going to lift the poppet, and then there's another poppet inside the poppet that has to get more fuel pressure. Then it opens, and then everything flows. So it's got to be an instant on for that and an instant off. This one starts to lift up as fuel pressure builds up, and I told you it has the V slots in it. So the point here being the nozzles are sized to accommodate proper fuel flow at max power. Therefore, the flow divider helps regulate flow at lower speeds. So the nozzles are sized to accommodate proper fuel flow at max power. So are Continentals, but it's just a different system because you don't have adjustable orifices out in the nozzles. Fuel flow at max power. Therefore, the flow divider helps regulate fuel at lower speeds. So the valve is spring-loaded. To the closed position. At idle, V slots limit fuel flow to nozzles. V slots. And remember I told you there are slots that are cut. It's the outlet for the fuel. So the poppet is exposed to a bunch of V slots. And as the poppet goes up, it exposes more of the top of the V, which is a bigger opening, which allows more fuel to flow. Until it gets all the way to the top, then it doesn't regulate that anymore, and then the nozzle orifices will. V slot opens one. Okay, idle V slots flow to the nozzles. Now I'll write this. So as power is increased, and flow increases, these slots open to a point where it no longer regulates fuel, and nozzles take over. Some of the words I'm using could be argued is not totally correct, like the V slots are regulating fuel. The servo does the regulating. This just kind of aids in its job. All right, but here's the big point, which we already covered. Because nozzle pressure increases, because nozzle pressure increases in direct proportion to metered fuel flow, i.e. as pressure increases, so does flow, a pressure gauge installed at the flow divider serves as a fuel flow gauge. So because nozzle pressure increases in direct proportion to metered fuel flow, which is to say, as pressure increases, so does flow. As pressure increases, so does flow. A pressure gauge installed at the flow divider serves as a fuel flow gauge.
How many gallons per minute per hour?
Yep, gallons per hour. All right, so it doesn't say pressure, it just says gallons per hour. And when it works, it works. When it doesn't, it doesn't. So if one nozzle gets plugged, let's talk about that. One nozzle gets plugged, one fuel nozzle. What happens to that particular cylinder as far as rich and lean? You're not getting as much fuel, let's see. Okay, that cylinder runs lean, but the servo is kicking out the amount of fuel that it's supposed to kick out. And it's going to the flow divider, sending the flow divider the correct amount of fuel. Gets to the flow divider, and it's supposed to distribute, we'll say 4-cylinder, this fuel flow equally amongst 4 cylinders. But that one, number one, is being stubborn, and it's partially plugged. So where does the rest of so it's going to run lean. But where's the rest of the fuel go? The other 3. That cylinder runs lean, and the others run rich. And, let me see. Oh, this is a good one. So this problem will present. Well, what do you think? What's a pilot going to complain of?
Increased fuel
Temperatures.
I've got
Very high.
3 items here. So 1, what do you got? What? High fuel flow. Not really. Not.
high cylinder.
Well, let's stop at that one. Pilot says high fuel flow, and I say not. Why not?
Because the fuel's still flowing.
No. Why does the pilot think it's high fuel flow when it's really not?
Because it's a pressure gauge.
So pressure gauge, and you have a restriction, so the pressure goes up. So it says that the flow goes up, but the flow really went down, but the pressure went up, so the gauge lied.
Okay.
Yeah, the gauge lies. Gauge lied. All right, what else did we have?
High temperature,
What kind of temperature?
cylinder head.
Okay. 1 high CHT. Very good. That one that's running lean, probably higher CHT. And you got a mixed match of fuel flows.
Running rough now.
Rough engine, yep. Rough running. All right. Let's do the inverse. I do it later. Let's see. When servo is placed in, so we're still talking about the
So,
flow divider.
flow divider.
Okay. When servo is placed in ICO, stands for what? Idle cutoff. Fuel flow or fuel pressure drops. And spring. And spring closes the poppet. Not the poppet in the servo, but the valve. Spring closes the valve and fuel shuts off.
And the divider.
Yep. Closes the valve. I'll put in divider for you. In divider. And fuel stops. It also locks off the fuel system from the nozzles, which still have that line in between them. Because what's going to happen now is you shut down the engine's baking on those little tiny lines that are running down into the fuel injectors, and they're going to that fuel is going to vaporize, and you're going to hear it hissing and popping at all the nozzles. So if you ever if somebody shuts down a fuel injected engine, and they walk away, you'll hear it, the engine tink tink as it's kind of going through its cooling phase, but you'll hear the little and so they're hard to start. So you ever see a pilot out there with a fuel injected engine they can't get it started, do not point and laugh, because fuel injected engines can be really, really tough to get started sometimes. Horrible. It's like, I wonder why people even, I know them and I understand them, and you do too. And so, but the non flying public get into an airplane and the pilot can't get his airplane started. It's got to make them really scared, but it's just kind of the nature of the beast.
It's hard to start. It's hard to start at hot temperatures.
Yes, very hard,
Right.
very hard. Because number one, those lines have been purged of fuel, and so you need to run the boost pump with the flow gauge high enough to get fuel to go to the flow divider, and then out all of those nozzles. And yeah, so you've got that long. You've got to, and so you're sitting there in the cockpit going, is it enough to get the fuel out and prime, or is it enough to do a vapor lock or a hydraulic lock, or just enough to get halfway? You don't know. So it's really hard to guess. Then you always err on the side of not enough, for sure. Yeah.
You said that hissing sound is fuel that's left in those lines going out the nozzle?
Yes, because the cylinder, you shut down the engine, those cylinders are 400 degrees now, and the lines are that far apart from them. So that line gets really hot, and so all that fuel vaporizes and the lines
So does
going
that
up.
mean that's enough pressure to open up the valve that we were just talking about?
No, because the nozzle's open.
Oh, okay.
And the valve doesn't open from back pressure. It needs forward pressure from the servo up.
Okay.
So this is just going to come and press against a plunger that went down. So you can't open the plunger. The fuel coming from the servo comes up and hits a diaphragm that lifts it. So
Got it.
two different opening mechanisms. So unlike carburetors, so carburetors, you got to know how to put them on and rig them, and the same thing with fuel servos and fuel injected systems. So that's the same. Carburetors, you have two adjustments, and only thing you're really ever going to do with those is idle mixture, idle speed. You're also going to check the fuel screen. On fuel injected systems, you're going to do idle mixture, idle speed, check the fuel screen, and you have to clean the nozzles, which means that you have to take them out. You have to know how to deal with them and not screw up, which is really easy to do. They're very delicate. They can't be lost. You can't change part. Some of them are two-piece. You can't swap the pieces. The nuts that go on them are brass. They're fragile. You over tighten them, you will crack the nut. You crack the nut, you'll get a fuel leak. Fuel leak sprays onto a hot cylinder, you start a fire. If you've got the GAMI systems on it, you have to make sure that the proper injector goes back in the proper cylinder. And with most of these, you have to make sure that the proper nozzle goes in the proper cylinder and it's clocked to the right position. So there's a lot to know about the fuel nozzles for just a surprising, simple little thing. Okay, fuel nozzles. They are the air bleed type, which means they have a vent to them, and they're going to normally aspirated, meaning not turbocharged, not supercharged, normally aspirated. There's a screen open to the atmosphere, and as the fuel flows through it, it sucks air through the little screen, emulsifies it right there at the nozzle, and sprays it out. So that is the air bleed type. R of the air bleed
How much
type.
are they? You said?
Oh, I don't know what do they cost?
Yeah, a couple hundred.
I'd probably guess 175, $200 a nozzle. I'm guessing. I don't know. If you have a turbocharged engine with that style, where if you tried to turbocharge an engine with that style, you have to think about the fact that here you have a nozzle that has a screen that's open to the atmosphere, spraying into a cylinder that is turbocharged, which has a higher pressure than the outside air in some engines. If it's turbo normalized, then the air pressure is the same. And so if you have the air pressure in the manifold is the same as the pressure here, then you really doesn't want to suck any air. It's depending upon that vacuum inside the cylinder to suck some air in. If you have a supercharged engine where the manifold pressure is higher than the outside air pressure, then it tends to want to blow the air back the other way. So you actually have to put a shroud over the nozzle and put upper deck pressure, which is turbocharged air, around it and force turbocharged air through it.
What?
You say what? It was so simple what I just said. Flow divider. V-slot. There we go. Idle, max fuel flow. I think we looked at that yesterday. There's a good indication of a fuel pressure gauge. Unless you're watching online, you won't be able to see that.
Figure 70.
There we go. So that's a twin. R stands for?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so there we go. Fuel pressure, PSI. Well, this one's got PSI. How about that? Cruise power. Oh, that's pretty cool. I never really paid that much attention to it. It actually has a percent power. This must be out of a Baron. Cruise power, sea level. Yeah, I don't know about that gauge.
What's that, altitude?
Yeah, altitude, where you want to be at altitude. But anyway, it usually has gallons per hour, not PSI. Make a liar out of me. All right. There we go. So these are our nozzles. So you have the fuel chamber, but here's a little air chamber. It comes through here, in, emulsifies the fuel, and out you go. There's a new style and old style. We'll watch the video on that. But this is what it looks like if you have a turbocharged nozzle. You have to put this little shroud goes over it, and this right here is high pressure air comes in here and blasts inside of it. Otherwise, it would just look
Is
normal.
that hooked to another line?
Yes,
from
it's hooked to it.
turbo?
Yep, it is.
Right, because if it's the same, no fuel. How'd you say if the pressure's the same, no fuel will come out? Or
No air.
The air
Oh, there's a lot of pressure in that fuel. It's going to push fuel, but you have a problem with that air,
getting in the
bleed.
emulsifier.
the air bleed.
Okay.
Air bleed has to have a difference of potential between where it is and where it's going. It kind of wants to flow that way, otherwise it doesn't do it so well. All right, fuel nozzles, air bleed type. Meaning air bleed is mixed with the fuel of the nozzle. Meaning air bleed is mixed with fuel at the nozzle. On normally aspirated engines, the MAP stands for what? Manifold absolute pressure is less than atmospheric, So air is drawn in. Or into the screen / air bleed and mixes with fuel. Or atomizes it. All right, so a little bit ago we talked about a clogged nozzle on the fuel part of it, so the fuel orifice. But what if we get an air bleed blockage? So we talked about yesterday, I think, an air bleed blockage will cause that cylinder to suck out the fuel, for lack of a better term, or suck out extra fuel, that makes more sense. Suck out extra fuel and run rich. All other cylinders will then run lean, and fuel flow shows gonna be the opposite now. Low fuel flow.
So less pressure, but you're getting.
It's less pressure.
But it's the same amount of fuel.
Probably a little bit more, because it's pulling on it now. All right, what are the signs? Let's see, indications. Then we'll do a break. Indications. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 indications. What do you think we got?
Low cylinder head temp.
Low cylinder head temp. He's not wrong, but I didn't write that.
Oh, man.
On which one?
On one that's, yes.
Nope, that was running lean. Could be high. The other one's be a little bit low. So I go high CHT. The other one had low CHT on that cylinder, so this would be the opposite.
So even though the air flow is blocked with more fuel getting in, it won't.
It's gonna run.
Because more fuel. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
I see what you're saying. So would you say low?
Theoretically.
Huh?
Should be hot enough to vaporize.
Yeah, it'd be hot enough to vaporize it. All right, so you want to go? I can make 5. That one's gonna be low.
The clock.
Low CHT. Okay. Yeah, that's good thinking. What else we got?
Runs rough.
All right, runs rough. Let me see. I didn't really write that, but you're not wrong. Runs a little rougher. What are some of the things we already talked about?
Low fuel flow.
Okay,
rate.
low fuel flow, which is actually low pressure, not necessarily low fuel flow. Well, I do have poor idle, so, which is like running rough. You could see a high idle cutoff, RPM rise, because that one cylinder is going to be running really rich.
So like maybe 100 or 200 RPM.
Yeah, it could be. And poor idle cutoff altogether. May not want to, because engine still tries to suck in some fuel Normally, if you're shutting down, it's got that air bleed, and so you plugged up the flow divider, but now it's going to try and pull that fuel out of the line.
So it might die out of cutoff.
Yeah, support auto cutoff will not shut down. Nice. Will not shut down. So there we go.
It's running where so you get like a really high increase.
Well, but the other ones aren't running so rich, so it's just that
Oh,
one's going to be giving you a problem.
So,
So, all right, break it time. And then